Good evening. My name is Doug Rosendahl, and I'm the squadron leader of the CAF Rise Above Squadron. We'd like to welcome you and thank you for joining us this evening for an evening with a longtime supporter of the CAF Rise Above program and a friend of mine for over 20 years, Colonel Harold Brown. But in addition to Colonel Brown, we also have a special surprise guest that you will not want to miss. So be sure and stay with us to learn more about this special treat that we have lined up for you tonight. So let's get started. Colonel Brown grew up in Minneapolis, Minnesota, where he developed a passion for airplanes. He was enrolled in the Tuskegee Institute's aviation training experience in Alabama and was commissioned an officer in the U.S. Army Air Corps in 1944. He flew 30 missions, strafing and escorting bombers in southern Europe before being shot down and bailing out of his severely damaged B-51. Colonel Brown spent the rest of the war in a German prisoner of war camp. After the war, he continued his service in the Air Corps and at what became the newly formed U.S. Air Force. He flew 20 different types of military aircraft, including the B-47, and retired in 1965 at the rank of lieutenant colonel. After his Air Force career, Colonel Brown began a new career in education and earned a PhD degree in education and retired a second time from that career as the Vice President of Academic Affairs at Columbus State Community College. That's a mouthful. The U.S. Congress awarded the Congressional Gold Medal to Colonel Brown and all the other Tuskegee Airmen. He is a 2020 inductee of the Minnesota Aviation Hall of Fame. Colonel Brown is passionate about the importance of education and the opportunities it brings to all young people, and has been a prolific speaker and writer for many years. He and his wife, Marcia, have co-authored his memoir, Keep Your Airspeed Up. Welcome, Harold. Thanks for joining us tonight, and thank you for your long-term support of the Red Tail and Rise Above program.
It's a pleasure. Happy to be here.
We're really glad to have you here. How are you holding up with COVID-19?
I'm smart. Inside. I avoid all of the outside. No public, no nothing, no visitors. But it sure is getting boring.
I think all of us are ready to have this be over and move on. But
yeah,
we gotta do what we've got to do.
You've got to be very, very careful.
That's exactly right. So I know you grew up in Minneapolis. What was early life like in the 20s and 30s in Minneapolis?
Well, let me say this up front. Minneapolis, when I was there, is not what it is today. As a matter of fact, if someone had told what is occurring in Minneapolis, I would have told them, no, not in Minneapolis. It would never happen. But I'm talking about 80 years ago when I left there, actually about 79 years ago. And at that time, the population of people like us was no more than about 1% of the whole population. And there was a pocket of us up on the north side of Minneapolis, another small group on the south side of Minneapolis. And then, of course, St. Paul, they call it the Twin Cities. There was a small group over in St. Paul, Minneapolis. But I lived a good life as a young kid in a completely integrated neighborhood. There was Polish people across the street, Swedish people on both sides of me, a big Latino family right behind me, and a very large Jewish family just right down the block, right on the corner. And we all lived happily ever after.
Yeah, well, we'll talk more about that.
So life was good.
Yeah. Well, we look forward to a time like that again. So your parents and you had a brother, I know. Tell us about Bubba. He's kind of famous in his own right.
Yeah, my guy, excellent athlete. Matter of fact, had opportunities to go off to college, and it was interesting because they were all in the South. And after he got a number of offers, he went to Dad and said, "Well, which one do you think I should go to?" And Dad said, "None of them. They're all in the wrong location. If you want to go to college, you go to college in the state of Minnesota." Of course, my father was born and raised in Alabama, so he would have none of it. So a number of his good friends accepted the offers and went south to a number of colleges. But my poor brother did not go. But he was well known, had a very successful career, and was really a great guy. Those who knew him thought very highly of him. But Bubba passed away about 5 years or so ago. So
Well,
great
what
guy.
I know Bubba best for was his involvement in the Ronald McDonald House, and he was a major factor in Ronald McDonald House in Minneapolis, and
Yeah,
was
matter of fact, he was very instrumental in the first one being built in Minneapolis.
right.
But that was Bubba. Yeah.
So both of you have achieved great things in your life, and that's a great story. So speaking about Alabama, when you graduated from high school, you ended up back in Alabama. Did you sign up for military service, or were you drafted?
No, when I turned 17 years of age, I graduated from high school in June of 1942. And after graduating, the very next day, I went bebopping down to the recruitment office. I told them what I wanted. I set for the exams. At that time, they changed and they said they would accept high school kids because they needed a lot of pilot, navigators, bombardiers, and all of the rest of them. And for most of the early guys that went in, they were all college graduates. So they extended the opportunity to guys like me, fresh out of high school. So I went down, said, passed everything, and waited for about 6 months. All of my paperwork had to go to Washington, D.C., where they made the selection. And fortunately, I was selected. And I say I was very fortunate because there were thousands of guys that made application that was never selected, nothing, they never heard anything about it. They wound up being drafted, and that was the end of it. But I was just lucky, pure unadulterated luck to be selected.
So how did you find out about the Tuskegee program to apply for that?
Well, I used to deliver a black news weekly newspaper, and one of them would have a big article about the big debate was going on. Started about 19 late 38, 1939. The big debate that was going on: should we train them to fly or not train them to fly? The War Department, no way, a waste of time. They'll never be able to fly, and if they can fly, they'll never be able to use the aircraft as a weapon. Then we had big organization, NCAA, another big organization, the Brotherhood of Burma of trained porters and whatnot, a big organization. And then we had guys like Truman, who was Senator Truman, who became president, was very supportive. So we had our side and big people. They were arguing with the department. And that went on until 2 years, until 1941. I guess Roosevelt got tired of hearing about it. And in March of 1941, he said, that's it. We'll train them. We'll have one squadron, the 99th Pursuit Squadron, as they referred to it, made up of 35 pilots and 27 aircraft. And the first class was named in July of 1941, 13 cadets. Every one of those men were all college graduates. 3 of them had master's degree, and one of them was a West Pointer, and that was B.O. Davis Jr. And that was the first group. That's when it all started.
So you said earlier your dad wasn't too excited about your brother going south to play football. What
No.
do you think
Yeah,
about
he
going
would
south to
really
go to
look
Tuskegee?
that. Yeah, he nixed that. I said, no way, no way. Of course, my brother, my father and my mother were both from Alabama, and my father was born in Jennifer, but he finally wound up in Talladega, and my mother was born in Talladega, Alabama. And how they got to Minneapolis, I'll never know. As a matter of fact, all I know is that my mother, with her mother, left and wound up in Minneapolis. My father finally left, and he was only one of 9 kids, the youngest of 9 of them. And my dad was pretty outspoken. Got himself into a little trouble, a very fast incident. He goes in to buy a cat. The cat doesn't fit, so he lays it down and gets ready to walk out. The guy said, "Now, John Brown, you know better than that. When you try on something, you own it." He says, "But it doesn't fit." "Nope, you tried it on, you own it. Pay up." Dad said, "No way." They called the sheriff. The sheriff comes down, says, "Now, John, your daddy taught you better than that. You know when you try it, you own it. But it doesn't fit in you tonight." So they finally said, "Okay, the first and the last time. The next time you own it. Understand?" "Yes, sir." And that's the time my dad said, "I think I better get out of Alabama because I'm going to get into trouble." So he left. First to Michigan, and then from Michigan, he was in the lumber business. And then from there, he got over to Minneapolis, Minnesota. How, I don't know how he selected it, but that's where he wound up. And that was it.
So, what was it like for your parents in Minneapolis when their son graduated in an aviation program? Well, back up just a little bit. Is the first time you'd ever been around airplanes when you got to Tuskegee?
No, tell you a little story. When I fell in love with an airplane, I was in the 6th grade. I had no idea what cost it. I don't remember seeing any movies or anything else about it. All of a sudden, I woke up one day because I was supposed to become a pianist, and that is what I was working on. And I told Mom, "Nope, I'm going to be a military fighter pilot." And my mother looked at me and said, "Boy, have you lost your mind? Get on that piano stool." "Yes, ma'am." I sit on the piano stool, cross my arms, and I refused to practice. And finally, the music teacher said, "Mrs. Brown, here isn't practicing. You're wasting your money." So Ma gave up. I knew I broke her heart, but she, we finally said okay, and she finally accepted it. But I was in the 6th grade and 11th years old. I used to be a soda jerk, and I always saved my money. So I was 16 years old. I saved up $35. I got my uncle Cozell takes me to Berlin, and I found the fixed base lessons. That $35 got me 5 flying lessons, $7 dual instructions. I took my 5 flying lessons, ran out of money, and I said, "But I'll be back." I never did go back, so I never saved enough money to go back. So that happened when I was 16, and then was 17. I immediately applied, and the rest of it is history.
So, what airplane did you solo in when you got to Tuskegee?
Well, the first one, I sold in the old PT-17 Stearman. Matter of fact, I sold it in 7.5 hours. And it's an interesting story about that PT-17. When I turned 92, right out here, we have a big air museum right at the airport. And the guy who owns it's a good friend of mine. So I went in and I said, "Ed, you got any of your buddies who own a PT-17?" He said, "Yeah, I do." I said, "Can you have him come down? I would like to fly." And he said, "Sure, I can arrange it." So he comes down, I meet him, and he and I go flying off in his PT-17 Stearman for about 40 minutes. Wonderful. Came back in, greased it, and I hadn't missed a beat. Smooth as it could be. Got out and I said, "I only wanted to do it because that's the end of my career. The first airplane I flew, the last airplane I'll ever fly. Thanks very much." And I've never flown again.
Yeah, well, that's a great
That
story.
was the end.
So, how did your mother feel after telling you that you'd never be a military pilot when you graduated from Tuskegee?
Well, it's interesting. Bubba and I, we were the dearest of friends, but at the same time, you could be your own worst enemies. He was 5 years my senior, and it was always, well, you got to take Harold along. Do I have to go with him? I don't want to go with him. Well, the two of you got to go together, or none of you, or neither one of you are going. So you know what kind of relationship we had. It was contingent, just a bad relationship. I can recall when the draft started back in June of 1942. My brother was out in California, and the draft was writing him letters. So Dad calls up and says, "I think you better get back home. The draft is looking for you." So he gets home. He was home no more than a month or so. He was drafted, and I said, "Thank God he's out of my hair. He's gone." And I went back and opened up the closet, and Bubba was a sharp dresser. And I said, "Mine, all mine." Well, that was my brother. We never wrote to each other, never spoke to each other again. And it wasn't until February of 1945 that he was on his way down to see me. Now, we had a dear friend, Earl Bowman, and his brother. His older brother and my brother were the dearest of friends. He was a captain over in the 332nd. He was the armament officer. So he knew me quite well from Minneapolis, but he was keeping in touch with Bubba. And he was writing Bubba regularly, telling Bubba, "Yep, Harold's okay." And Bubba kept up with me through him. And he came down to see me in February of 1945 on his way down. He's in an accident. A truck goes off the bridge, 12 guys, 4 unhurt, 4 pinned underneath the truck. He was one of them, and 4 of them were killed. They called me the next day and said, "Hey, come over to Fourth Field Hospital and identify your brother. That's just about a mile from our field." I said, "Oh my God, he's dead. Identify." So I jump in the Jeep, I go running down there, and I said, "Lawrence Brown, where's he at?" He says, "Down there, make a left turn and such on the door on the right." So I go down. That guy looked like he had a bruise over every part of his body. He was a mess. So I said, "Bubba, are you okay?" And he looks at me and he says, "Yeah." He says, "Harold, will you please brush my teeth?" The first thing out of his mouth. But that was my brother. And that was the first time that we had spoke to each other since he was drafted in June of 1942. The first time. The folks get it. The oldest son is very seriously injured. He goes home. But before he goes home, I see him and I say, "Hey, I'm going on R&R down to Naples for 1 week. I'll be right back to see you as soon as I get back." I got back that Friday night. I went in to see him. I said, "I got to fly a mission in the morning, but after the mission, I'll be right in." That's the mission that I get shot down on. So now the folks have just received a letter about their oldest son was seriously injured. Then they get another letter. "Sorry, your son is missing in action." That was pretty tough, on mom and dad. But everything worked out. I eventually, was liberated. The war was over. And when I got back home on June the 28th on a 60-day leave, Bubba had just arrived because he was in the hospital, and he was home on a 90-day leave. So we became overnight the very best of friends. And that's the way it remained until, the end came for Bubba.
Well, Bubba was a great guy, and
Oh,
I had
yeah.
the opportunity to spend a lot of time with him, and he just always had a big smile and a positive attitude. So when you got to Europe, was your first airplane the Mustang?
Yes. It was interesting. The group was flying P-39s when they first went over, and that was on January the 1st of 1944 when they went over. And they were in Naples just flying the 39, primarily patrol duty. And they seldom even saw an enemy aircraft. Twining, General Twining, who started the 8th Air Force and got it up and running, was all of a sudden reassigned. And that is when Jimmy Doolittle took over the 8th Air Force, and Twining came down and took over the 12th Air Force, which was down in Italy, which was really a demotion. And that broke Twining's heart because he's the one that started the 8th Air Force from nothing and made it into something, the largest Air Force that ever existed. They could put up 2,000 bombers, 1,200 fighters. That's how big they were. Well, Twining is reassigned to the 15th, and the 15th Air Force is one of his Air Forces. He calls Bill Davis and says, talked to him in February and said, how'd you like to come over and be a part of the 15th Air Force Fighter Command, escorting bombers? Bill Davis does flip-flops and says, just what I've been waiting for, a real assignment. So they were assigned to the 15th. They joined the 15th and was all ready to go in June. They flew their first mission on June the 7th, right after Normandy on June the 6th of 1944. They flew the first mission, but they were flying. They switched aircraft from the 39 and was flying the P-47 Thunderbolt. They flew the P-39 Thunderbolts for only 30 days. During those 30 days, they got 19 victories. Starting the very next month, they started giving them the old P-51Cs because the other three fighter group, they were trading their P-47 for the D model, the P-51, and we took over their P-51C models.
Well, we know something about
them 1 week, and they flew their first mission, I think, on the 5th or 6th of July in the P-51, and then it was the P-51 from that point on. Now, when I finished flight training, I took all of my fighter training in the P-47 because that's what they had. So when I got overseas, I switched and went from the P-47 into the P-51.
So on the mission that you were shot down, what kind of a mission was that?
Well, it was a strafing mission. It was rather interesting. We normally did escort, but you were bringing your bombers back. Sometimes you had a little additional fuel, and they would always let 4, 5, 6 of the flights or so go off looking for targets of opportunity. They only occasionally had pure strafing missions, but they did have several of them. On that mission, the 15th Air Force had a special mission. It was strafing marshalling yards from up in Austria, southeast for about 100 miles or so. They gave the mission to the 332nd. The 332nd gave it to the 99th, and I was a replacement pilot in the 99th. So our squadron got a maximum effort, took off some 22 airplanes early in the morning, got up into the area, and caught all of the locomotive traffic. Because normally they would see us fly over escorting bombers, and they knew that it would be X number of hours before we would get back. And when they got back, they're all in the tunnels. And we go looking for targets and opportunity, and we knew where they were at. They weren't on the tracks. They were hidden in all the tunnels. So we never did catch them. But this time we caught them. And boy, we had a natural field day. We had just about 5 flights, had a couple of spares with us. And I was in the lead flight with Major Campbell. And we came down to the southeast and dropped a flight off here, go up about 15 miles, dropped off a flight and so forth, all the way up to the other end. And all you heard was chatter. Boy, I just got one. Did you see that one blow up? Boy, I just blew all kinds of chatter. A perfect mission. This was like throwing the fox in a briar patch. Couldn't ask for a better mission. Very successful. We in the lead flight go all the way up, and we're now coming back down the valley collecting our flights. So we all get together and we're circling, and it's always the last one. Bill says, "Wait a minute, hang on. You guys circle for a minute. I see a big locomotive down the regatta. Come on, Brown, because I was flying his wing. Let's go get it." The last one, I saw him shooting. He breaks off and he says, "I'm out of ammunition." I said, "I got a few bills left." I go in, I got that locomotive lit up like a Christmas tree. I said, "I'm getting low. I better get out of here." And just as I pulled up, that's when it blew. Big cloud of smoke. And I heard, well, the plane really rattled. I came out of the explosion upside down, but I had the nose up, rolled it out, and I said, "My God, wait until I get back." They developed those camera gun pictures because I went right through it with my hand on the trigger. The most beautiful pictures in the world. Just wait. Well, I never got home. The airplane flew for, I don't know, 3 or 4 minutes. I was trailing smoke, lost my radios, and the guys were circling me, pointing to me. And about that time, all the coolant comes out across my windshield. And you know what happens to that inline engine when you lose your coolant. So that was the end. Rolled it over, popped the canopy, kicked the stick forward, threw me out. My chute opened, obviously, but I was at low altitude, about, well, reasonably low, about 12, 1,500 feet uh, when I got out of it and landed. And I have never been so lonely in my life. I could hear those airplanes leaving, going home, and here I was in Germany, looking like this with my brown face, 20 years old, and saying, "What the hell do I do now?" But I was smart enough to recognize I knew where I was at, and I could say, if I could evade for just 8 days, I could make it to the Russian line. Well, as soon as I made up my mind, all of a sudden, and I was in a kind of a valley, all of a sudden on top of the hill comes a couple of soldiers that jumps off their skis and they put their rifle on me. And I came out, and I threw my beautiful 45 away, silver plated, gorgeous, threw it away, came out with my hands up, and that was the beginning of the damnedest thing ever happened to me in my life. They walked me right back to one of the villages that we had strafed. And I was met by 35 of the most angriest people I have ever seen in my life. Rightly so. As I grew older and older, I said, well, they had every reason to be upset. Here we are strafing the place, not shooting at them, but anything, shrapnel, anything could have hit a guy's wife, hit his kid, kill him. And they had every reason to be upset. Now, I wasn't thinking that rationally at the time, obviously. I was thinking about my own hide. But I knew I was going to die. No doubt about it. I couldn't run. I couldn't hide. I was talking to myself. Harold, what are you going to do? I don't know what I'm going to do. Well, you got to do something. What am I going to do? I'm here all by myself. There's nothing I can do. So I said, well, I guess when they get ready to kill me, I will react and they'll either shoot me or just grab me and hang me, and that'll be the end of it. And they had the perfect hanging tree. And all of a sudden, I felt something on my shoulder, and another constable snatched me, pulled me back, and stepped in front of me, put a round in the rifle, and held that rifle on about those 35, 40 people. Couldn't speak German, but they're shaking their fists and they're screaming at each other, and he is waving the rifle in front of him, and he and I backed up into a little pub. We go into the pub, he throws everybody out, and we barricaded ourselves in there. And we stayed in there. This was in March, so it got kind of cool. And as it got dark, people started dispersing. And then around midnight, apparently all the people had probably dispersed by then. And we felt it was safe enough We go out the back door down to the next village, and I was there for 3 or 4 days. The mission goes over. I said, I'm going to have company tonight, I bet. A B-24 bomber crew bails out. They pick them up. They come into where I am in this little jailhouse, 24 of them all wall-eyed and whatnot, and they see me. And they look at me, and they aren't for sure. They said, are you a pilot? I said, yeah. I have my leather jacket on. Yeah, I got wings. I'm a pilot. They said, what's going on? I said, big stay on me. I was shot down a couple of days ago. So this one little kid comes up and he says, Harold, I'm scared to death. What's the matter? I'm Jewish. All you got to do is keep your mouth shut. Nobody will know who in the hell you are. Now, I can't hide like that. 8 days of traveling, we finally got up to Nuremberg. And that is where that's where the interrogation center was. It was up at Frankfurt, and everything was collapsing. The Russians were coming from the east, the Allies from the west, and they kept moving everything in. So I was interrogated. Then they put me in a POW camp, about 10,000. I was just south of Nuremberg. There are a couple of weeks, and then we were on a forced march for about 2 weeks down to Moosburg, Stalag Luft 7A. And it's about 30 kilometers northwest of Munich. And there for a few weeks, and Patton comes through with his Third Army, knocks down the fence, and we were liberated on April the 29th. And of course, the war was over, for us.
So what was life like in a prison camp for a black man?
I say again.
I say, what was prison life like for a black man in Germany?
I had absolutely nothing to complain about. I had friends. It was interesting. I went into this prison camp, and my dearest friend was shot down 2 days earlier, and I thought that he had made it to Switzerland because he was on his way to Switzerland because he had trouble. He doesn't get to Switzerland. He crash lands. They pick him up, and he was in a POW camp. I come to the same POW camp in the same compound, and I wound up with him right there, my dearest friend. And we stayed together until we were liberated. But we had no problems, no nothing. We had friends. I almost was colorblind. I mean, I almost forgot if I was white, black, or what. We were just all POWs together, we're all with the same problems, hungry every day, treated just fine.
So that had to be a great contrast from when you left. You got liberated from the prison camp and then made it back to. Did you go back to Tuskegee initially?
Well, all POWs when they got home got a 60-day leave. I went back to Tuskegee, and I got home in June. I went back to Tuskegee in September, and I became instrument flight instructor. In October, I was up practicing in a T-6 with Captain Dart, who I knew up in the 99th, and he was my safety pilot up in the front seat of that T-6 and in the back. And what happens? We have a mid-air collision. And when it happened, I knew just what it was. Boy, I come out from underneath that hood, and it was just by the grace of God. We were coming towards each other. They see each other at the last second, and it was some of those hazy days you could get down south. No vertical. You could see straight down, but you can't see horizontal at all. And at the very last minute, my pilot snatches his stick back. He goes up, and just by the grace of God, the other pilot dumps his nose. So we went in opposite directions, but our wing hit their rudder. They're at the rear end of their aircraft, tore everything off. Their airplane goes into a spin. They had to bail out. Our aircraft had a very badly damaged left wing. we were pretty close to the base, and we were able to land our aircraft, safely. But I thought, I said, man alive, what in the world else can happen to me? I lost my engine on my 12th engine, got in the dogfight with me 262 trying to get back home. And sitting up at 25,000 feet in friendly territory, and boom, the engine quits. And that was something. So I found a little 4-foot landing strip with a ditch in the center, and trying to slow this 51 up down the landing speed and setting that thing down on the first 2,000, bellied it in. When I got out of that airplane, I patted myself on the back. I said, perfect job, Harold. You couldn't have done it any better. So that was my first. Then I bailed out of one. Then I had this midair, collision. And here I had just turned 21 that August. And I said, wait a minute, Harold. A crash landing, a bailout, a midair collision. Come on now. One of these things are going to catch up with you soon. But I was very fortunate and survived all three of them.
So you stayed in the Air Force for the rest for a full career?
I stayed in, yeah. I flew the B-47. Matter of fact, I was an instructor pilot in the B-47. And I had a select crew. And after I had it for 5 years, I was invited to come up in the command post. Well, that was a big deal. In SAC, in those days, you had SINSAC. Then you had 3 numbered air forces, the 2nd, the 15th, and the 8th with their command post. And every air force, you got a number of bases, but on the bases, every SAC base, you got a command post. And so that's how you communicated from SINSAC all through the command post. And the command post is right next to the CO's office. And interesting enough, no one but a controller could send the alert force off the war. We kept a third of our force on alert. Later on, we put some of the B-52s in the air, but at least we had a third of the B-47s all on alert. And that's what we did. And when the big Cuban crisis came up, we often set, there were 6 of us, we wondered who would be on duty in case something goes bad, and then we had to send the force out. But as you know, they worked themselves out of that one. But I'll tell you the story about that little thing. Curtis LeMay, who was a big bad guy running SINSAC. I mean, he was something else. And SINSAC and Curtis LeMay had not become the chief of staff. And he begged Truman, he said, turn me loose. He says, and I'll wipe Russia off the face of the earth in a matter of days. Now, that was back in 1960. And back in those days, Russia did not have an intercontinental ballistic system. That's why they wanted to get into Cuba. But we had one. We had the best intercontinental ballistic system. We had 1,400 B-47s. Each 47 carried a 1.1 megaton weapon. That was it. Then we had the B-52. We had about 60, 70 of those. We had intercontinental ballistic missiles. And LeMay told the Russians precisely what we had and said, if you run this blockade, the war is on. And I'll wipe you off the face of the earth in a matter of days. And we could have done it had we launched everything. But Kennedy said, wait a minute, no, we cannot go down in history as starting a nuclear war. No. We aren't going to do that. Well, you know how the Cuban crisis, it all resolved itself, and that was the end. Well, but those are some interesting times.
Harold, you've had an amazing career. And at the beginning, we promised that we had a special guest for you tonight. And his name is John Wixer. And he, too, was a POW in World War II after bailing out of a B-24 that was downed by flak on a rail yard mission in Southwest France. Are you with us, Jack?
Yeah, I'm here.
So, Jack, we've got you on the phone and we've got Harold here on the camera. Tell us a little bit about what happened to you in going on a B-24 to France.
Well, I had a fairly
Before you
good
get started, Jack, happy 100th birthday.
Oh, yes. And Jack's 100 years old, or soon to be.
Yeah, I will be soon. Yep.
So tell us about your B-24 mission.
Well, our B-24 mission, the worst one was my 17th mission, flying into, where was it there?
Avignon,
France, because the Germans had a big marshalling yard there. We got hit with flak. 6 of the guys were killed, or 4 of the guys were killed. 6 of us bailed out and became prisoners of war.
So did you have escort on that mission?
Oh yes, we did.
And who were they?
We had the Red Wings, what we called the Red Wings. I didn't know what they're
Red Tails.
huh? Red. I used to look out there and I'd see them sliding in from the left and get behind us and follow us into our mission. That's where it all happened, in that mission.
Did you understand who was flying those red-tailed airplanes?
I did not know what group it was. Only thing I knew was we called them the Red Tails. That's all.
Yeah. And did they escort you on lots of missions?
On a number of missions, yes, they did. But they didn't actually. Most cases, they didn't go in to the actual bombing run. They would stay out of the area of the actual bombing area and return to their base.
So when did you learn what the significance of the red-tailed airplanes were?
Well, yeah, they were all, I think, black.
When did you learn about that?
Yeah, I learned, that they were mostly black pilots flying 17s. And
they were flying Mustangs and P-47s.
Yeah, right. Absolutely. Yeah.
So you never, while you were in Germany, you never learned that until you got home.
No, I did not. I didn't. Yes, that is correct. Absolutely.
And
I didn't know her. All I know is that they were out there, and you would usually slide in from the left and follow us into a bombing run, And that's how.
Did you have much air? Did you run into many German airplanes that they chased away?
Oh, yes, definitely. They had contact with a number of them, actually shot down a few of the German pilots. Yep.
And so have you since in recent years had any opportunities to meet firsthand with any of the Tuskegee Airmen that were escorting you at that time?
No.
So
no, I did not.
Just to let our viewers know that you have I believe it's a great nephew who lives in Minneapolis who connected us with you, and that's how we found out about this. And it's just great to bring the bomber crews together with the fighter crews that were escorting them. So how did you feel when you saw a P-51 show up for cover?
Oh, loved it. Loved it. They were wonderful.
And how did you feel, Harold, when you saw bombers on the horizon and knowing that you were taking care of them?
Well, it was kind of neat, really. Of course, I, came in a little later, and because of that, we really had control of the airspace at that time. Now, there were still a lot of active German fighters, many of them, but we didn't see them in the number, and when they had a lot of their top aces, because a lot of them had been knocked down, but they were still a formidable force. So this was always kind of neat. And like he said, we would come up and we have 4 squadrons. And of course, we would pick up our bombers because we knew them just by their tail and their, call sign. So we would pick up the bombers. Matter of fact, we could hear them taking. They were taking off from down around Folger, is where all the bombers were, and they were flying right over our base, going up the Adriatic Sea as they headed up north towards their target. And we would, take off 30, 40 minutes later, catch them well before they even got up to the northern part of the Adriatic Sea, and we would join up with them. And with 4 squadrons, we could put one on top, one on the bottom, and one on each side of them. So we could really box them in more so than with a group that only have 3 squadrons. But it was fun. And like he said, we would take them into the IP. They would hit the IP, the bombers were, and the IP is the initial point. And then they would turn on their final run towards, target. Now the bombardier takes over and he's flying, everybody's in perfect formation, and he's lining up the target. Now, there's nothing we can do for them while they're over a target. And the target, there was just one big black cloud because of all the ACAC guns that were shooting. We would leave them at the IP, go around them, and watch that beautiful formation go into that gray, big black cloud. And my God, periodically, you would see maybe a burst and whatnot, and you say, "Oh my God, there goes a bomber." And when they would hit like that, you could see the flash right amongst all of those ACAC shells going off, all those black clouds. They would come out of that target pretty raggedy for the most part, but they would catch hell while they were going over that target. And all I could think of, some bomber pilots got more damn guts than I got flying through all that crap and having to fly straight and level and not make an invasive move because the bombardier has got his sights lined up and he was just flying that aircraft until released bombs.
So what was it like inside the flak cloud, John?
What was that?
What was it like being inside the flak cloud?
Oh boy. It was a little bit exciting, I'll tell you.
Yeah.
It wasn't very nice.
So when you bailed out of your bomber, when you were shot down by the flak, where did you land? You landed there in France?
Yes, in France. What is it?
Near Avignon.
Near Avignon, France.
And then you were transported all the way up to northern Germany, correct, to Stalag Luft 1.
The Baltic Sea, yep. Stalag Luft 1 on the Baltic Sea. Yep.
And
took us for 4 days. 4 days to go there, yeah.
Yeah. Well, we really appreciate you joining us tonight. Is there anything you'd like to say to the Red Tails for the escort that they provided you? Here's your chance to speak.
I loved them. I loved to see them coming in. Right. Really did.
Incidentally, I go down to Florida, and I often go over to the villages because I have a few friends that live down in the villages. And this village is almost about 100 square miles, really. And
maybe you guys can get together and you can meet.
It's rather, yeah.
That would be fantastic. So, John, you to hang with us here just a little bit. We may have a question or two for you, but because we're going to take some questions. Harold, you've been really involved. We want to talk just a little bit about the Rise Above program, and you've been very involved with that. What does the Rise Above program mean to you?
Well, I think that's one of the greatest ideas that Don Hines has ever come up with. When he came up with this ideal of let's restore old P-51C painted up in the Tuskegee Airman story and tell the whole story about yes, you can overcome any obstacles if you put your mind and the effort into it. And that's the story that the Red Tail Squadron tells. And it was really neat. Of course, that was a sad thing when we lost the first one, but after we restored it and we got that semi trailer to go along with them, then that really made the whole thing complete. It's interesting. You know, we just talk one thing: education, education, education. If you look at things, for the average man that comes out some 30 or 40 years ago, the only requirement that he had to have to get a job was a strong back. And I was from Ohio, highly industrialized, and with a strong back, it's all it took is to get a good job. Well, along comes technology, and guess what happened? They need fewer and fewer and fewer strong backs. And it's now to the point where they need some highly skilled people. But then, even to get in those highly skilled programs, you still got to go to the school and get enough educational courses so you're smart enough to go to those highly skilled programs.
Well, you've
So
been
we're
great.
still playing a big role. So, that is the key to everything: education, education, everything. You have got to go to school, period. And it's becoming more so and more so. If you don't, there's nothing left for you. And there are going to be fewer and fewer jobs that require a strong back. So I suggest that you stay in school, or you better, or you will never have a decent job.
Right. Well, you've been a big proponent of that, and you're a living example of just like mother wanted you to be a pianist and you wanted to be a fighter pilot. And frankly,
Uh,
if your dream was to be a black kid to be a fighter pilot in 1935, that was crazy, as your mother said, but you did it. And
And it was pretty crazy, even 38, 39, and 40, up to 41. It was still crazy.
right, you using the principles of the Red Tail Rise Above program, you were able to accomplish that, and you're
Oh,
a
yeah.
testament to that. And we're really honored to
It's
be.
interesting. It's interesting. I use those six things to conclude my book, and I use each and every one of them as to how those things played a role in my life.
All right. Well, we appreciate your support and your long-term support for many years. So
Doug,
we've got a couple questions here um, from a couple folks. First question is for you, Harold. What did you think about the movie Red Tails?
It was fun. Now that's interesting. We were up north uh, uh, in Wisconsin at the big air show.
Oshkosh.
Yeah, and this was several years ago, and the Red Tail had just come out, and who was there but Lucas? And Lucas was on the stage along with they invited several of us Tuskegee guys, and we were on the stage with Lucas, and I can recall that I was kidding with them. I was saying, "Boy, uh, hey, the Red Tails, man, you sure made us look good, man." As a matter of fact, I was doing things in that 51 that I don't quite remember doing, but it sure looked good anyway. And he says, "Harold," he says, "when I made that movie, I put in, I and he had this whole animation department because he was doing so many of these kinds of things. He said, I put $55 million into that movie. And he said, and I sure had to really, really dress it up to make sure I drew enough people to get my money out of it." I said, "I'm not criticizing you." I said, "You made us look great. Keep it going, babe." But it was a good
One of our
movie,
viewers asked,
and of course it had some of the, other stuff in it. But it was a movie, and it was not a documentary, but it was a movie.
right. One of our viewers asked how they can get your book. I think we sell it in the Red Tail store, but it's on Amazon as well, correct?
Oh, yeah. It's on Amazon.
And the name of it is?
Keep your airspeed up.
And every pilot knows what that means.
And then you know where that came from, don't you?
That's right. We've got a question for you. We've got a question for you, John.
Oh,
We've got a question for you, John. What was the name of your airplane, your B-24 that you were shot down in?
Twin Tails.
And how many missions did you, what mission were you on when you were shot down?
17th.
All right. Well, that's a lot of missions.
Yeah, it was quite a few. It was busy for a while.
I got one more question for you, Harold. Do you remember a guy named Ollie Kaminsky, who was a childhood friend, neighbor?
was that a question for me?
Yeah, that's
Doug?
for you, Harold.
Oh,
For you.
yeah. One more time, I missed part of it.
Do you remember
Give me the question again.
a childhood neighbor named Ollie Kaminsky?
Kaminsky, come in. Wait a minute.
Well,
Did I know that guy in the 9th grade? I think I knew a Kaminsky.
Well, he was one of our viewers tonight, and it's his 97th birthday, and he was a waist gunner on a B-17.
What?
That's
Kaminsky?
yes. What a small world.
Is he on?
We'll see.
Is he on this thing now?
We'll see if we can get his contact information and get you guys hooked up.
Yes, indeed. Probably. I never would have believed it.
Well, gentlemen, it's been an amazing evening tonight, and I really appreciate your time. Thank you so much for joining us. And on behalf of 12,000 members of the CAF, I would like to say thank you. And at the CAF, our mission is to honor, educate, and inspire. And the best way we believe that we can honor you is by making sure that your generation's sacrifice was not in vain. And to do that, we have to keep these stories alive, cause people to understand the sacrifices that patriots like you made 75 years ago. And so we thank you so much for that. And to those of you who have joined us tonight on Facebook Live or who are watching as this will be posted long term, we thank you for joining in here, for your questions, and wish everyone a good night and stay safe. So thanks again, everybody. And with that, we'll sign off.
Thank you. Thank you.